Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to another special episode for you guys. Last week I had a show that a lot of people seem to really like, which was the best progressive rock albums of the decade so far, so for the 2020s. And I thought I'd go backwards a little bit and do the best prog albums of the 21st century so far. So everything from 2000 onward is what I'm covering here on this episode. It's been my favorite period of music. This has been the period that I've grown up with this stuff. Many of you I know come from an earlier era, but I was a teenager in the early 2000s, to date myself a little bit, and that's when I was really discovering music in a big way. My dad showed me progressive rock back in the early 2000s, and it sparked my love for modern progressive rock, which has followed me all the way through this time period. So I thought it made sense to talk about the last 25 years of prog music and point out what I think are some of the highlights from my particular catalog. And I restricted myself on this a little bit with some weird arbitrary rules that made this a little bit of a difficult task, but also made it kind of a fun puzzle to put together. Basically, I only wanted to pick one album from each year, from 2000 all the way up to 2024. So that leaves me with 25 albums, one per year, and I didn't want to repeat artists. There's one exception here that I couldn't finagle a way to not repeat them, but for most of these artists, I picked one album, and it was a little bit restrictive. In some cases, it's not quite the representative album I would have chosen, but they're still all good albums, and I'll mention when I get to them, like what other albums I would also consider from this time period as some of their best. So that's kind of some of the caveats out of the way. So if there's some oddness here on the list, or why did you choose this album by this band rather than that one, that's why, because I was trying to solve this puzzle of one album per year and one album per artist, and it was actually pretty difficult, because certain years had like 3 or 4 huge albums that I love with my whole heart, but I can only pick one out of that mix. So we'll talk through it as I go through. I'm going to try to do this quickly. I say that all the time, and then they end up being long videos. But I really want to just be punchy and just showcase some really cool albums and let you guys go off and enjoy them. I'm sure many of you already know most of these albums. So, and first of all, some honorable mentions and some albums that you guys will probably be surprised aren't on the list. Would probably be on many people's prog list, but this is more my personal favorites and my artists that have touched me over these years. Is My River Flows is a personal favorite of mine from 2005. It was nearly on the list, but I inched it out for something else at the last minute. But is a personal favorite that I don't think enough people know about, an American prog band, and that's one of their best albums in my opinion. But you can't go wrong with any of their records, especially some of their latest records are also fantastic. But I wanted to point out there's no Opeth on my list. Blackwater Park and Ghost Reveries would have been 2 in consideration from 2001 and 2005, respectively. But as many people know, I'm not into the death metal, heavy growling vocals, so they don't quite make the cut here. In fact, there's probably a lack of prog metal. I could probably do a separate prog metal list because a lot of these honorable mentions lean in that direction. But I just personally have preferred like more of the mainstream prog stuff in comparison. But other Pain of Salvation's albums, The Perfect Element Part 1 from 2000 and Remedy Lane from 2002 were big albums that I enjoyed back in those days. Have kind of strayed away from the band a little bit more recently, but still think those are landmark albums. I'm not a huge fan of their conceptual Project B, which I know a lot of people speak highly of, but it's a little bit kind of avant-garde and all over the place for me and my ears. Tool's Lateralis, I think, is a heavy contender here, back from 2001. I love Tool and what they bring to the table, but didn't quite make the cut here. The Mars Volta, Deloused in the Comatorium from 2003 nearly made the list, but just barely was edged out. Fantastic record, and they've continued to have a bunch of cool albums beyond that one. Dream Theater isn't on the list, surprisingly. One of my favorite prog bands, prog metal bands of all time. And I would have considered 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence from 2002, but couldn't bear to remove the other choice from that year. And I wanted to give a mention to Kevin Gilbert. The Shaming of the True came out in 2000, which is an incredible concept record from an artist who left us way too early that I think is worth anybody's attention. So honorable mentions out of the way. Let's get into the list proper and some of my favorite albums from the past 25 years. All right, I'm going to shift over and show off some vinyl. In some cases, I only have CD, and in one particular case, I don't have it on physical media at all. At least not that I can find currently in my collection. So let's get into it. All right, let's run down the top 25, how I crafted it. Remember, one per year, only one album per artist with one exception. So first I have at number 25, Anathema, We're Here Because We're Here. This is the 2010 choice. Fantastic atmospheric style prog. I really love the vocals, and there's just a beautiful quality to this that I think deserves a spot here. Just heavenly. This is where they peaked in this newer iteration of their sound. So that's number 25. And number 24, personal favorite, probably wouldn't be on most people's list, but I really loved this album, which is Kendo, and their album Happy However After. A band that's maybe more in like a jazz rock style, but I think has some crossover appeal to prog fans. What really appealed to me about this was that they released all these tracks on Patreon, which I was a member of, and polished them up and put them together on an album. So these are all tracks that I feel a personal connection with because of being part of the Patreon and in their community. And I just love their jazzy, kind of cool indie sound. It really connects with me. I also love This Is What Happens, which was considered for this list. But to me, this is kind of a great newer record from them. Newer as in came out in 2018. My 2020 choice, which maybe conflicts a little bit with my recent decades list, this is Pendragon's Love Over Fear. I mentioned in my video that probably Wobbler's Dwellers of the Deep would now be my choice for the year, but there's another album by Wobbler that we'll get to later on in the list that bumped it out a little bit. So I decided to add back Pendragon, who create a very cool, beautiful album with this one, which to me brought back kind of the more symphonic style side to their sound. Just really beautiful, great melodies, laid back, and great guitar performances. Just a fantastic record. At number 22, I have Transatlantic's The Absolute Universe, which is my pick for 2021. At the time, I picked Mirrors Playing House, but I have a different Mirror album that's on this list somewhere. And this is the artist that you may see a repeat of, because I just love their albums from this from this period so much. It's hard to just pick one of the many options. So you might see them pop up again later. Spoiler alert. But I love this project. It was a little bit marred by band conflict at the time. There's multiple versions, and it probably spelled the demise of the band in total, but a great super group at the height of their powers doing just incredible music that is right in the lane of what I love about modern symphonic prog. At number 21 from 2003, I have The Music That Died Alone from The Tangent. They've continued with a whole slew of records that I also love, but I just started at the beginning. This is their debut, which I really loved. And really struck me right off the bat. It was one of the first new projects that I checked out because I was getting into the Flower Kings, and Royna Stolt was part of this, and I love Andy Tillison's work on here. It's just really bombastic, cool, progressive rock with a jazzy edge that I've always loved and has sparked me to continue following the band ever since. Next, I have at number 20 from 2009, this is Big Big Train's The Underfall Yard. Probably my top pick would be the English Electric, especially the full power version. There's another album from that year that I couldn't keep away from my list, so I decided to go with The Underfall Yard, which is also excellent. The introduction of David Lungden and the official Nick DiVirgilio inclusion on drums. And this band has always connected with me. This is a great showcase for their style of this classic prog sound, kind of Genesis style approach, but done in a modern way. And their English sensibilities and their inclination towards history and towards the geography of their homeland is just very apparent here right off the bat, and has a great epic to it. And to me, this started the trajectory of what I consider the best period of the band, so I thought it was a good inclusion here. Another one that's, I would have picked something else, but I decided on the Deer Hunters' Antimai here for this part of the list. This is from 2022. I probably would have preferred Acts 4 and 5, but once again, it was hard to find space for them because there's other albums from those years that I prefer a little bit. But this is a great album as well. showcasing a new side to their sound. I love the Deer Hunter and what they're able to accomplish, more of an indie prog style. This adds a bit of funkiness to it and introduces them to a new world after their Axe series. I love their aesthetic. I love how they're able to blend different genres together of music and create something that sounds wholly unique in their own. So definitely highly recommended for all fans of similar music to me. Next, I have Beardfish, which this is the one I couldn't find on physical media. I'm shocked, but my pick for 2008 is Beardfish's "Sleeping in Traffic" Part 2, which I think is a real highlight of their career. I love Part 1 as well, but this one just packed a bigger punch. It has the big epic on it, has that cool, like, funky style, a bit of a Gentle Giant aesthetic, and throw everything but the kitchen sink kind of Frank Zappa-esque approach, but just done beautifully. Some of my favorite prog done by them, and I think this is a highlight. I also love Destined Solitaire, which would have been a contender, but this is one of their best albums. I think many would agree. At number 17, I have it on CD here. This is Riverside and their album Second Life Syndrome, which is my choice from 2005. This is where the band really took off for me. I really love their kind of prog metal sound, but not too heavy, done in a proggy style, concept record, and just one of Poland's greatest prog bands, and they've continued to do great since this album. I love Fear in the Time Machine. I love their recent ID Entity, so I thought they should be represented on the list because they've been one of my favorite bands throughout this period of history, and I wanted to document that in a great fashion. So there they are. Next, I have Spock's Beard and their album V. This is 2000, the choice for the earliest year on this list. And my love for Neil Morse and his projects is well documented on the channel. I love this record. This is one of the peaks to me of what they did back in those days. I love At the End of the Day, love The Great Nothing, two big epics that live up to their name. Some great shorter tracks in between, some quirky moments, and it's just a fantastic exploration of their symphonic, fun, proggy style that first made me fall in love with the genre. One of my favorites, a classic to this day. Next, I have IQ and their album The Road of Bones. This came out in 2014. Fantastic record. One of my favorite of the modern era of IQ. One of the best neo-prog bands. And for some reason, this just connected with me right away. It has this kind of haunting, dark feel to it. But done in this kind of uplifting progressive rock style. Has so many cool, memorable moments. Some moments where they let things just kind of settle in this dark, kind of monotonous style vein, but then they have these big explosive moments as well. It has a great epic, Without Walls, and it's basically 2 discs, so it's a big sprawling project. The second disc maybe could be considered like a bonus disc, but I think it's just as good as the main album. And so this to me is the peak of what they were able to do. I love Frequency as well. I love Dark Matter. But this album really was the pinnacle to me of what IQ was able to accomplish in their career in this era of the band. At number 14, from 2017, this is Wobblers From Silence to Somewhere. As I mentioned, this is why Dwellers of the Deep isn't on the list, because I decided on this album, which many people consider the pinnacle of their output. I think this one and Dwellers of the Deep are about neck and neck, but they're both fantastic records. Great Norwegian prog, a big epic to sink your teeth into. They do kind of a classic style symphonic prog that harkens back to all the classics, to Yes, to Gentle Giant, to Jethro Tull, all of that stuff, and with their own unique stamp on it with that Norwegian feel, and it just creates this fantastic record that is one of the heights of new progressive rock for me. So definitely worthy of inclusion here, maybe for some a bit low on my list. Next I have Echolin, which I recently did a review of their latest, but this is what I consider their best, is their untitled or self-titled, I'm not quite sure, Window album. Many people call it Window Pane or something along those lines, but Echolin's album from 2012 is my number 13 pick, and I just love this record to death. It's basically 8 tracks that are all fantastic and unique in their own rights. I love everything about it. It's just melodious and beautiful. Has a bit of their kind of Americana, folky singer-songwriter vibe. It's not over the top proggy. I mean, they have a prog epic here with Island, but I feel like their sound is more just matured and great songwriting skills, and they know how to pepper in their prog references without being too over the top about it, and they just have a unique sound and style all their own. One of the best in American progressive rock, in my opinion. Speaking of that, we have Fido. Snow Torch is my choice. So this is number 12, Fido's Snow Torch. This is from 2011. There's a lot of choices you could pick from him. Doomsday Afternoon is fantastic. Infernal, even number 7 is great. That whole run of records is just like practically flawless for me, but I love this one for some reason. It kind of reminds me of like classic 70s prog albums like Passion Play or Thick as a Brick, where it's just two epics, two sides of the coin. Of basically, it's one epic separated over two sides of Snow Torch, and it has all those classic 70s prog sounds and styles, but Fido's unique approach to it, and it's one of those hidden gems that I think everybody should listen to. Fantastic record, one of my favorites from the recent era, and can't wait to see what Fido does next, because it's been a while. So excited about this record, and hopefully you guys will check it out. Number 11, a personal favorite of mine. This is Thank You Scientist and their album Terraformer, which came out in 2019. I just love their sound. They have this cool kind of funky nature. They have horns, they have violin, they have a lot of quirky instrumentation. They can be described as similar to maybe the Mars Volta, with a bit of indie prog energy, kind of like the Deer Hunter and acts like that, but just so unique, so cool. They have almost a Zappa-esque sense of humor as well and style, and this album just blew my mind when it came out. I think it's one of the best things they've crafted, and hopefully they'll be coming out with a new record in the next year or so. So really excited to put this on my list, and it just grows in my estimation as I continue to listen to it. One of the best records of the past 25 years for me. Breaking into the top 10, of course, I had to include it as last year's winner. I've been talking way too much about it, but Mir's Wheels Within Wheels takes my number 10 spot. Check out any of my recent videos to hear me talk about this record. It just works for me on every level. I absolutely love it. Cool, pop prog, perhaps you could call it, with some great orchestral sounds to it, male-female vocals, and it just works for me on every level. It's just emotionally satisfying and came to me at a time of need, and I'm just grateful for it as a great record. Number 9, I have Arion and their record, The Human Equation. Kind of a last-minute inclusion. I kind of forgot that this was in this time period, but this is one of their best albums, a sprawling concept record from the mind of Arjen Lucassen, with a whole ton and host of guest artists, all these huge vocalists from the world of prog and prog metal. And it's a fantastic story about someone's different emotions and them dealing with a traumatic experience and what that means in their mind, and how that all plays out with these different vocalists playing the different emotions. And it's just a really cool record that is unique in its way that it's presented, and has so many cool sections to it. I love how it's divided up into different days and different sounds, and it's varied and interesting, and is the height of Arjen Lucassen and his powers of being able to craft these really cool hybrids between prog metal and prog rock into a really cool concept record that I think everyone should listen to. Fantastic record. At number 8, I have Steven Wilson, Hand Cannot Erase. This is from 2015. And I absolutely adore this record. The Raven would also be in heavy consideration. I'd kind of go back and forth. Those are practically tied for my favorite Steven Wilson records, but it's a fantastic concept record. I love the aesthetic of this record, where I think it beats out Raven maybe slightly, just because Raven leans so heavy into this kind of nostalgic 70s prog style, where this kind of brings that aesthetic but into a more modern age, and it still has the same musicians doing what they do expertly well, and it just crafts a brilliant record with a great concept behind it. Very tragic, but beautiful in its own way, and I just love what Steven Wilson accomplished here on that record. At number 7, this is what topped my favorite of this decade so far. This is Moon Safari's Himmelbakken Volume 2, which I absolutely adore. Lover's End is another one of my absolute favorite records. It was hard to not include that as well on the list, but I decided to stick with this one because I think they came back and returned with their strongest album to date. Great vocal harmonies, maybe a bit more pop-centric, a little bit more saccharine, but I love that stuff. It's just beautiful. And they have a great epic on here, and it just is one of the hallmarks of modern prog for me. I just love this record, love the band's sound and aesthetic, and had to include it in my list here. Getting into number 6, I decided to include Frost and their album Million Town. For me, it was just a landmark record. This came out in 2006 and changed my views of what music could be, and I just really appreciate it for that. It just came out of nowhere, has this really interesting production style, has some great almost poppy influences, but done in this big, expansive, proggy way. It's heavy and epic, but it doesn't really veer into metal. They do it in a way that feels more in line with prog proper, and I just love the big epic Million Town itself, and Blacklight Machine is such an influence to me. I love their latest record as well, that I talked about a lot, Life in the Wires, but this is the peak of what they did, and I really love it and think it's one of the best things that's come out in prog in the last 25 years. At number 5, I have Haken and their record The Mountain, which to me is the peak of like the new era of progressive metal. I really just fell head over heels for this record, and it's catapulted Haken as one of my all-time favorite bands. Any other records could be on this list, but to me this is my favorite one, so I made sure that it would be included. But it was heavily contentious because 2013, when it came out, has a lot of incredible records that would be in heavy contention as well. So it was hard to pick this and sacrifice some other things, but I love it. Love the Gentle Giant approach on something like Cockroach King. Has a bit of a mature sound compared to their first 2 records, but I love the jazziness, the diversity. They aren't afraid to lean into some really heavy sections, and it's just a really cool conceptual piece that works for me to this day and shows a great maturity of songwriting and abilities of a modern prog band. So definitely one of my favorite records of all time, not just of the past few years. Next, this is a personal favorite, probably way too high for most people, but I've just continued to fall in love with it. And when I first heard it, it just blew me away for whatever reason. It's the Flower Kings, The Sum of No Evil from 2007. This is my number 4 on my list. For some reason, it just would not leave my CD player. To me, it's like the height of that kind of classic symphonic prog sound. It's the best thing the Flower Kings crafted, and they've always been one of my favorite bands. I love their positivity and their joy in their music, and this just was a perfect representation of it. Some of their double albums feel a little bloated, but this really packed a punch with a 1-disc effort. Still has a big epic on it, a longer track to start the record, and runs the gamut between their different symphonic style sounds. But I just absolutely adore it. I think it's fantastic, well worth listening for any prog fan. I feel like at the time it was not as heralded as some of their other records. Some people thought it was a weaker entry in their catalog, and I just could not understand at the time because I thought it was one of the best records I had ever heard, and I still feel that way. Fantastic if you like kind of that classic symphonic prog style that I love, similar to Yes and Genesis at their heyday. This is fantastic. Roine Stolt at the height of his powers, in my opinion. Now I have... we talked about Steven Wilson. Let's talk about Porcupine Tree. This is In Absentia at number 3 from 2002. This was another landmark record that got me into progressive metal, progressive rock in general. When I first heard this, it blended the alternative rock that I was loving at the time as a teenager with the prog music that I was starting to fall in love with from my dad. And his influence. So this was the perfect marriage of those things. I still love the production and sound of this. It just sounds pristine. Love the poppiness of some of the tracks, how, you know, something like Train sounds like it could be on the radio. It's just a beautifully well-written song. But then you've got some heavier moments. You've got some really out there kind of instrumental sections. And it runs the gamut. I think it's a great varied record, and to me the height of what Steven Wilson was able to accomplish in his career. Right here, one of my favorites. And I love all the other records surrounding it. I could have put Dead Wing here. I could have put Fear of Blank Planet, which I know would top many people's lists. I even love some of the other earlier records and things that came later. But this to me is the peak just for my personal story with it and how it affected me. And now the 1-2 punch here. This won't come to much of a surprise for those that know me and know my personal preference to a particular artist that takes both the 2 and the 1 spot here. And at number 2, I have the Neil Morse Band's Similitude of a Dream from 2016. To me, this is the height of what Neil was able to accomplish as a solo act. I guess it's still technically a band effort, but this is his band, and they do a double disc concept record that just works on every level to me. And it's remarkable to me because I was a huge fan of Neil Morse all the way dating back to the early 2000s. And sometimes it's hard when it's an established artist for them to really surprise or excite you. But this did. When it came out, I thought this is a new peak for the band, for Neil Morse and his output. There's something special here that they've tapped into. This configuration of musicians just perfectly executed an album that runs the gamut to a lot of different styles and a lot of different aesthetics throughout the runtime, but everything sounds like it fits in this world and in this particular aesthetic. It's just a beautiful record, and if you could combine it with The Great Adventure, which came after it, it creates like this 4-disc just epic story that works on every level for me, and I just love the playfulness and the fun on board here. It just has everything I love in music, all in one cool album with a lot of incredible themes. The ending of the record just makes me emotional every time I hear it. They just perfected it. They've figured out the perfect emotional punch, which Neil does expertly well on all of his records. But to me, this is the peak of it, of him just like really hitting you in the gut with that emotional climax and epic ending. And he does so as well. This is the earlier iteration of perfection. This is Bridge Across Forever by Transatlantic, probably my favorite album of all time. Yes, I had to double dip into Transatlantic, unfortunately. I tried to avoid doing that, but I just couldn't come up with a better option. And this is my number 1 record all the way back from 2001. This is basically what solidified my love for music in general, but really for progressive rock and following all these artists. This is the entry point. Duel with the Devil is one of the first modern prog epics that I ever heard, and it allowed me to kind of go and explore all these different bands that these members come from. It's an epic super group that I just love with my whole heart. I think every one of their records is just fantastic, top tier quality. And to me, this is the height of modern progressive rock. If you like this style, I know it's not for everybody, but for me, if you love your epic symphonic prog in the style of classic artists like Genesis and Yes and Jethro Tull and all of the classics, you can't get much better than this. This is really the peak of that side of the genre, and that's what I fell in love with and what I continue to go back to. It has such nostalgia, and I'll always be thankful for this record and how it introduced me to my favorite genre of music. So there you go. That's my list of what I consider the top 25. Like I said, with certain caveats, there'd be other choices if I didn't restrict myself in these arbitrary rules that I set. But I thought it would be fun and give you guys a rundown of some of my favorites. And if you haven't heard some of these, go check them out. They're all remarkable albums. Well worth your time and attention. And let me know in the comments your choices. What did I leave off that you would have included in your list of top favorites? So thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a fantastic day and that you're enjoying the content on the channel. Trying to bring some really cool, good quality stuff to you guys, and hopefully it's working out. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you guys hopefully in a future episode. Enjoy the music, everybody.